Apartheid, segregation racial, Niravari. It doesn't matter how you say it, it holds the same meaning in any language. Apartheid was racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa. Notice how I said was, not is. That's because South Africa left that lifestyle in the past, all thanks to one man, Nelson Mandela. With help from the African National Congress, the National Party, and, strangely enough, communists, Mandela was able to successfully revolutionize South Africa. After decades of conflict between South Africans and the South African government, Mandela was able to negotiate a deal with President F. W. de Klerk in 1994, leading to South Africa's first multiracial election, turning South Africa into a democratic society. Everyone has to start somewhere, and for Nelson, that was in the village of Mvezo, named Tata, South Africa. Born to Ghana Mfkaniswa and Nosaniki Fanny on July 18, 1918, he was given the name Rolihlahla, meaning troublemaker, in Xhosa, his clan's language. Growing up, he was sent to a Methodist school, where he was given the English name Nelson by his teacher. He continued his education, planning to become an advisor for the Thembu royal house. Learning his father arranged a marriage for him, he fled to Johannesburg. There he met Walter Sisulu, who was an ANC, or African National Congress, activist. He met other friends who convinced him to join the ANC. After being there for a few years, he and others convinced the president of the ANC to create a youth league, which Mandela joined and later became president of. The ANC began planning protests and strikes in an attempt to end apartheid, which was their main goal, but that only resulted in arrests and stricter laws. One of these laws was the Suppression of Communism Act in 1950, which affected the actions of all protest groups. Mandela and 20 others were found guilty of statutory communism, which was something the government used to arrest those opposed to apartheid. He was given a 6-month ban to attending any meetings or talking to more than one person at a time. After this, still remaining president of the ANC Youth League, he opened his own law firm with Oliver Tambo, a friend and colleague. This didn't last long, as the government implemented laws forcing Mandela's business to lose many customers. While the ANC continued protests, he rallied support for the end of apartheid, leading to his arrest in 1962. He was captured near Howick, South Africa, by police. They were tipped off by the CIA, who feared Mandela's associations with communists. He was charged with initiating workers' strikes and leaving South Africa without permission. The next year, police raided a farm, revealing many documents planning sabotage against the government, some of which with Mandela's name on them. They took him to court, which was where he delivered his most memorable speech, his I am prepared to die speech.
I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
After this, he and 2 others were found guilty, but Justice Day Wet sentenced them to life imprisonment rather than the death sentence. The conflict continued outside of Mandela's jail cell, though. Others were getting fired up, even internationally. Many, including the United Nations and the World Peace Council, called for his release, but they were ignored. He would carry out the next 18 years of his life on Robben Island, a prison. He was subject to hard labor and terrible conditions, but these steadily improved over time. After a couple of years when the rules started to loosen up, Mandela and other prisoners began learning other studies, such as how Mandela started learning Afrikaans, the language of many whites in South Africa. Conditions continued to improve, and Mandela was relocated to Pollsmoor Prison in 1982, and later Victor Verster Prison in 1988. By now, Mandela was allowed many visitors, and he was able to secretly communicate with some of them. He learned that his speech from his jail cell during his first years at Robben Island had brought hope to people and had rallied them up.
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. But you don't have to have education in order to know that you want certain fundamental rights, you have got aspirations, you have got claims. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Other groups had formed, such as the Black Consciousness Movement, who had the same ideals as the ANC. Unfortunately, the results for most groups ended up being imprisonment of their leaders and supporters. The conflicts with the South African government didn't seem to have an end until 1989 when Frederick William de Klerk, or F.W. de Klerk, became state president. De Klerk believed apartheid wouldn't last and released numerous prisoners connected to political parties like the ANC. Mandela wasn't a part of this group. De Klerk did meet with Mandela, though, and discussed with his advisors, debating whether to legalize formally banned political parties like the ANC and to free Mandela. In 1990, he did both, and Mandela was a free man for the first time in 27 years. He and the ANC had tried to negotiate with the South African government and were finally successful. The ANC met with the South African government on May 4, 1990, and this resulted in the Groot-Schuur Agreement, which allowed for easier later negotiations and the removal of much violence. A few months later, on August 6, the government and the ANC met again, resulting in the suspension of the armed forces of the ANC. A little over a month later, on September 14th, the National Peace Accord was signed by representatives of the ANC and the South African government, who began to prepare the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, or CODESA. This was the beginning of the end to the apartheid-loving white South African government, until the Boipatong massacre took place. Mandela, believing de Klerk's government supported the attack, withdrew the ANC from CODESA, ending it. Negotiations continued soon after, though, with all groups seeing the importance of CODESA. One compromise needed was how the new democratic government would replace the old government. De Klerk wanted an appointed government where presidents served for a few years and then an election was held to elect a different president or re-elect the same one. The ANC wanted a majority vote government. Think of this as our presidential election versus how Congress decides on bills. A compromise between these was proposed by Joe Slavo, a friend of Mandela's and the leader of the South African Communist Party. He proposed that there would be a group government for 5 years after a democratic election, and there would be a president. This is similar to the United States' government. On September 26, 1992, the government, ANC, National Party, South African Communist Party, and all the other groups participating in this reform agreed on a record of understanding. This describes how the government will work, the processes for making laws, and all other issues relating to these and governmental actions. After sharing this record with all parties, a constitution was created and ratified on November 18, 1993, and a democratic election was held on April 27, 1994. This resulted in Mandela becoming president, with de Klerk and Thabo Mbeki as his deputies. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela is a man who many have heard of but don't truly know. Yes, he was a great man who fought for the end of segregation in South Africa, but he was much more than that. He was an African who overcame countless hardships and used numerous techniques, some more questionable than others, to free millions of people from the grasp of apartheid. He changed an entire country with compromise and inspired many along with that, like Obama. South Africa had experienced a myriad of protests and fights over the rights of the people, and Nelson successfully settled these disputes, creating a solution that worked for everyone. Using compromise, he successfully ended conflict in South Africa, freeing many Africans.